Well, hello everyone. Can you hear me? All right, great. So today, some people here have heard this many times, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is a little, everyone has heard of the Course in Miracles, yes? I'm going to just do a little riff on the Course in Miracles. I can't say it's my favorite page because I don't know many of them, but this one I like. And let me start with that. So is everybody ready? Ready. So it's on. It's in this one. The Foundation for Inner Peace version, and it's on page 468 under the title of the Message of the Holy Relationship. This is not going into that. It's just it's the third paragraph. It starts there. And then we'll just riff on this, yeah? So it says, yet we have heard, and if you can hear, just give me a sign. Yeah, like this or something. Yeah, all right. Yet we have heard a very similar description earlier, but it was not of you. Yeah, so basically, there's many descriptions of what we're not in the Course in Miracles with the hopes that what we are sees it. Yeah, so here's one of them. So, but still this strange idea, which it does accurately describe, you think is you. Let's say the idea of being a long-lasting, independent, separate entity. Yeah? Pictured and remembered as a body. Okay? So I'll say that again. But still, this strange idea, which it does accurately describe, you think is you. Reason would tell you, and the Course uses the word reason a lot. You could say wisdom or whatever, but reason would tell you that the world you see through eyes that are not yours must make no sense to you. Yeah? So obviously they're pointing to the perception of things from this thing and these two eyes, yeah? So we see a world of things based on time and space. Separation is the dominant. There's many different things, and all of these things, in a sense, have an inherent, long-lasting, independent, or short-lasting, independent meaning. They're real unto themselves. It's not like we're giving them the meaning, which is what we are in the dreaming. So, reason would tell you that the world you see through eyes that are not yours must make no sense to you. To whom would seeing such as this send back its messages? Yeah? So, what's being reinforced by the interpretation of life in the brain? The body idea, yes? What you're not is being reinforced by the narration about what this world is, what it isn't, experiences, this and that, yes? Yeah, so reason would tell you that the world you see through eyes that are not yours must make no sense to you. So to whom would seeing such as this send back its messages? Surely not you. Now, for most people, that surely ain't there. Usually, it's it's surely I'm that, yeah, not surely not you. So, surely not you, whose sight is wholly independent of the eyes that look upon the world. So what is that? What's that implying? Yeah, you're more of the awareness of things than a thing that's aware. Yeah? Yeah. So, surely not you, whose sight is wholly independent of the eyes that look upon the world. So you're seeing it isn't called vision, it's a vision, but it's not through eyes that are programmed, that collate what happens out there, takes it in, and uses it to reinforce the programming that you're the doer, the thinker, the feeler, the haver. Yes? And then to remember that doer, it's not about the doing, it's pictured as a body. So the body is the doer, the seer, the feeler, the thinker. Yeah? So this is, all right, so if this is not your vision, which is awesome, what can it show you? It can show you it's not your vision. That's the value. To value it in a failed system, it's basically screaming its failedness at you all day. If this is not your vision, what can it show to you? It's not your vision. I'm throwing that in. Yeah, it's not in the book. The brain, now this is important, yeah? The brain cannot interpret what your vision sees. This you would understand, yeah? The brain interprets to the body of which it is a part. All right, so end of story. If you don't believe me, maybe you believe the Course in Miracles. So there you go. The brain, the brain interprets to the body of which it is a part. Yeah, so there you go. So if you're listening to your head, you're listening to a narration that's based on the assumption that what is perceiving can be perceived. It's the body that's perceiving. Yeah. Yes? Basically, that's the condition we seem to be in. All right? The brain interprets to the body of which it is a part. That what it says you cannot understand. Yeah. Yet you have listened to it, and I would throw in ad nauseum, and long and hard you tried to understand its messages. Why? You have not realized it is impossible to understand what fails entirely to reach you. Yeah? It stops at the body. It stops at the doer. It doesn't go into the doing. It doesn't go into the seeing, the thinking, the feeling, the activity. It goes to the imagined noun, the thinker, the feeler, the seer. Yes? That's where it stops. The interpretation is not about what we are and doesn't arrive at what we are. It's all about what we're not, and it's there to reinforce what we're not. Yeah? So, you have received no messages at all you understand. For you have listened to what can never communicate at all, which is beautiful, really. Because it doesn't. It narrates, doesn't it? It narrates, it informs, it forecasts, but there's no communication. It never hears what you are saying back from the silence. It just yaps and yaps and yaps, yeah? For what it says you cannot understand, yet you have listened to it, and long and hard you try to understand it. You have not realized it is impossible to understand what fails entirely to reach you. I hope we have now. Yeah, I hope so. You have received no messages at all you understand, for you have listened to what can never communicate at all. Think then what happens. I would just drop out think then and just what happens, yeah. Think then is just going to add on. It's going to get worse. So what happens? Denying what you are. Now, everyone in these squares, do you feel like you're in the present tense act of denying what you are? No, most people don't. So he says here, denying what you are. This isn't like in 1988. Now, there's a denying of what you are right now. It's not like a historical event that long past gone. No, it's an activity going on now. Part of the activity is a denying of what you are. Yeah? What? Yeah. Yeah. So he goes, denying what you are and firm in faith that you are something else. That is the diagnosis, yeah? The diagnosis is the activity that we represent right now is a denying what we are and firm in faith that we are something else. This something else that you have made to be yourself. Yeah? In other words, there's an act of being identified as this something else. Yeah? And that something else, when we meet it, we call it me. Yeah? When we're going over it, we think we're going over me. Yeah? We're not. We're going over something that's foreign to us. And without that knowledge, all the other knowledge about it is going to be reinforcing the non-existent thing, not destroying it, yes? So, denying what you are and firm in faith that you are something else, this something else that you have made to be yourself, wow, yeah, becomes your sight. So now, that brain, which is interpreting to the body, is now you, and it's your interpretation. Yeah. And it's not to you. You don't think it's to the body, but it is all about the body, because you are framed as a body. So whenever you think from the idea of being a body about everything else. So when you think of being spiritual, you think of a body being spiritual. You don't see that spiritual is a nature in and of itself. It's not an attribute the body has. Yes? All right, so denying what you are and firm in faith that you are something else, this something else that you have made to be yourself becomes your sight. So you now listen to the story, like with abject faith. Yeah? Yet, and now I've ripped this page so it's odd. Yet, it must be this something else that sees and as not you. Yes? You see it? Explains its sight to you. Your vision would, of course, render this entire unnecessary. Yeah? In other words, if you were following that intuitive whatever, you wouldn't need a huge backup of thought. Yeah? You would have faith in the response that wouldn't have to be armed with thought, like a battalion of thought going with it. Yes? If your eyes, so under this is quite unnecessary, but if your eyes are closed and you have called upon this something else to lead you, why would you doubt it? Yes? Why would you doubt it? It's fucking jackpotted you terribly. Yeah? That's why. It's failed you every step of the way, and all you get back is excuses, rationalization, and blame. And if you're not blaming someone else, you're blaming you. You never look at the system itself. Yeah? Because the system, every time you go into the door of the system, it says me, and then it says do not disturb. Yeah? So you never check out. Yeah? So I think it's a beautiful description or diagnosis, yeah, of this denying what we are by the constant reinforcement of what we're not. Yeah? To the point, what we are becomes maybe a target we're aiming at to arrive at or hit someday. That's insanity. Yeah. So the idea of non-duality is premised on this also. It's not, the non-duality is a negation of this something else. Yeah? And then when there's the negation of the something else, there's a finding out of what's already so, which is beingness or awareness. You don't become aware. You've never not been aware. Yeah? So this is a beautiful description based on negation. Negation of what we're not, the activity that implies that we're something, the activity that claims the verbs to imply the noun, and now you're seen as before all verbs, when it's ridiculous. We go over this the last few weeks. I get confused with all these Zooms, but you don't think you digest your food, do you? No. So you don't have a list of what you forgot to digest last night and you got to catch up today. So you got to leave the Zoom early because you ate that big pizza And no, there's digestion. You have nothing to do with it. Yeah, and that's a pretty clear. It's clear. Yeah, and then there's heart beating. You don't believe you're beating the heart. Yeah, you believe there's a muscle that's beating, and don't know how it starts or stops really, but it's on hopefully right now. Yeah, you're not pumping the blood. The only thing that looks somewhat voluntary is breathing, but all the other situations are totally involuntary because something knew better to have us have any control over the fucking thing that keeps us alive. We would have gotten distracted and passed away, like the first 10 seconds of volition. Yeah. So no, most of the stuff is on automatic, thank God. Doesn't let your fingers get in there. And yet, that whole clarity about digestion and blood, heart beating and blood moving is completely lost when it comes to thoughts. Yeah? We believe we're thinking. It's mind-boggling. It's such a much more subtle process than digesting and taking a shit or whatever. But this one, I am definitely the doer of that. I'm the thinker of the thoughts. Give me a break. Come on, seriously. But see, when I have a thought or there's a thought, once I ring the bell of that thought, it seems like a lot of thoughts that support that story show up. Yeah, you've hit the algorithm, and then the programming downloads thoughts that go along with that little algorithm hit. Yeah? Just like when I had no idea about spirituality. I grew up a Catholic, and when I was 19 or 20, I met an Eastern modality. It was a young kid, so they were smart not to bring him in immediately. So they sent in his father's teachers, and we got all initiated into meditation. Then he showed up later. Yeah. Now what happened is, as soon as I was introduced to this spiritual community, I had thousands of thoughts showed up, thousands of them about how I should be, how the guru should be, how they should be. Where did they come from? I wasn't thinking them. If I was thinking them, I wouldn't have thought them because it made it like a hell. It was worse because I got stuck in a dilemma where I came to a conclusion. I didn't like the guru who was supposedly the Lord of the universe, so that didn't work too well. Who leaves the Lord of the universe? Just a complete freaking idiot would leave the Lord of the universe. But I wanted to leave the Lord of the universe, and I was stuck in a should I stay or should I go for years. Yeah. And finally I got loaded again, and that gave me permission to leave. Really, that's what happened. I just got high. That exiles me from all of that spirituality. And it wasn't that efficient, but it worked. Yeah. I was relieved of that bondage of should I stay or should I go? And I had thousands of ideas. Where did they come from? This little thing hit it, and then ding! Just like the spider shows up when you hit the web. All these thoughts show up. And each one lazily, or just without knowing, reinforce the big thought, which is I'm a thinker. Yes? It's the thought that stands above all other thoughts because it implies I'm the thinker. Yeah? We don't see that one. Yeah. So, this has always resonated big time, these two paragraphs from the Course, because I like to hear it in different ways. Yeah. I don't want to hear any live teachers now because I don't want to, do their shtick, so to speak. I just don't. But there it is. That's a beautiful way of saying it. Yeah. By not really saying it. All the direction is all about what you're not. It's all a recognition of this idea that surely it's not you. I mean, the Course just implies that it's so obvious it's not you that we shouldn't have to have 500 pages of a course. Yeah. But hey, so, yeah. So there you go. If you've been coming to these Zooms, why? I don't understand it, really. But if you're coming, you may not like what's being said, but if you hear it, soon in time, it's going to collapse something. Yeah, something is going to be seen, not by it, but you'll see it from what you are. You'll see the activity of what you're not. Yeah, and it will be clear. You will not have made it clear. You didn't really do anything for it to appear to be clear. It will just like interrupt your life, and you'll see things anew. Yeah, there you go. So, and this happened in a landscape of time a long time ago, and it's basically has been coronated with no ceremony, the last answer. Yeah, and this topic of spirituality really propagated a lot of questions. So the last answer is an incredible answer. Yeah. Yeah. And that unspoken yes just echoes uninterrupted, because I don't believe a thought determines anything. I don't believe my take of how I feel determines anything. I believe there is all these volatile, ever-changing conditions and circumstances, and then there's the space they occur in, or the space they appear in. The space doesn't get interrupted or doesn't get lost or gets exiled from itself by a feeling or a thought or an action. It only is implied by my feeling, my thought, my action. So, yeah. Don't wait for the no thought phase. Yeah. Really. Don't think that it's based on your condition. It isn't. Yeah, it's not based on your condition. That's the good news. Yeah. It's based on its condition, which is conditionless, always available all the time, no matter what you're thinking or doing, it's there. Yeah. Hallelujah. Truly. No. I think they talked about a retreat of Nisargadatta and how much faith he put in what his teacher said, which was basically, I guess, no matter what you're thinking, feeling, perceiving, doing, not doing, you are that. Yeah. So, yeah. So there's a belief that we can do something that seemingly makes us not that. I don't believe that. Yeah. That we can think ourselves somewhere that's not other than that. I don't think so. I don't feel that way. Yeah. I can feel a certain way that definitely qualifies me for disqualification from that. No, I don't see that. Yeah. So that condition isn't based on my condition. Thank God. Truly. Yeah. And my being it isn't based on what I'm not is doing. Yeah. So, anyone want to ask anything? Yeah.
Paul.
Yes.
So speaking of thoughts, I've had a lot of death thoughts lately. As I'm doing the purification that Regina Dawn Akers, who's the founder of our community, recommends, she does this thing online, and she has a whole YouTube series, the 500 Days with NTI. And one of the purifications is to be a superconductor. So I was practicing that
A super
superconductor.
what? Oh, a super.
Superconductor. So what that is, let me give you a little lowdown of what that is. The first thing you do is you relax your body. You realize you're in the next thing, realize you're in the moment, you're here, it's now. And then you're deepening into whatever you're feeling. Like if you're feeling aggravation, anger, contempt, whatever emotion, you feel it. So you're not denying it, you're not suppressing it. And then the next thing is you allow it. You allow it to be. And then there's some other steps to it too. So I was doing this beautiful practice this morning, right? And it was feeling amazing. And I started feeling like it feels like this knot, like this really contracted spot behind my sternum. And so as I noticed, I kept paying attention to it. It's like I was feeling deeper than I ever had before in my heart area and feeling expanded at the same time. So after about, I'd say about an hour or so, maybe 45 minutes of this, I felt my meditation was done. Okay. So then after that, out of nowhere, and that's how it seems to be, I'm minding my own business, and out of nowhere, and I would have said this was a great meditation, right? Or at least helpful. I feel like I've been in a car accident. My neck for the rest of the day, and even now, and I even took pain meds, and it feels like I have whiplash. And so then I was like, it's so uncomfortable and my neck hurts so bad. It's almost like I was laying down on the floor and it was making me cry. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, so if everything's for my healing and everything's for my awakening, then this has got to be for my healing and awakening as well, this pain. And so then I'm like realizing through other modalities that it's about the thoughts, right? The thoughts are like most of my experiences coming from what I'm thinking and believing. So when I drilled down and was like, what's behind this pain? And then I realized my thought was about death. So I'm having all these death thoughts. So now I'm like, okay, I see it. I still really believe death is real. And what I mean by that is not that spirit can die, is that bodies can die. And what I'm going through in my personal life is our dog is about to die, it seems. She's got this malignant tumor and it busted the other day, and she had surgery today, and she's got to have a follow-up surgery. So death of form is I've had many people in my life, go to funerals, see the body pass away. So there's this, and by the way, right now my head feels like it's on fire. So there's this belief that the form does pass away, and I'm in a body right now. It seems like I'm in a body. So now I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. I feel like I've opened Pandora's box. And yet I still want to use all of this for my healing and awakening. I still see how I believe that death is real, although I'm willing to see this differently. So perhaps you can speak on that if there's anything that comes for you to share.
Well, if you think that you're on this journey, surrender to it. Yeah. And I would feel
So
that
surrender to death?
yeah, surrender to it. And the pain in your neck, I would think, is just energy trying to move through something. Yeah. So sometimes energy gets released and it doesn't have it runs into contractions of the muscles and stuff. And so then you get a feel and experience of that. Yeah, so get someone to massage your neck or take a bath or something.
Really? That's it? Get a massage?
Yeah. Get your shoulders and your neck worked on. It'll feel better and you'll let the person be of service and then maybe go out and be of service. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
In other words, it's sort of like the way you're describing it. You've decided to lay on the operating table and you've submitted to an elective surgery, let's say. And so now just don't get up and don't play doctor and things will go great. Yeah, that's the faith. You have faith in this process that you're involved with. Yeah? That's what keeps you on the table. And you don't need to point out what needs to be worked on. Something is working on what needs to be worked on. Yes? So your job basically is more, you're not going to change anything. You've submitted to be changed. You're practicing this process. People in this community have followed, and some people have maybe been at it longer than you, and they can assure you that this is part of the journey. Yes? You'll run into death, whatever, stuff like that, and they'll help you not do anything too stupid, and you'll move on to the next part of the surgery, and yeah, and hopefully you'll become more a maximum use of yourselves and for others. Yeah, who
Well,
knows?
speaking of things stupid, I have a big trip planned and I'm really terrified of it because I actually haven't had a car for quite some time, and so I haven't driven. And I had guidance to go see my son who lives in Missouri, and I'm going to be driving there. And that's one of the fears, is getting hit by a beer truck.
Oh, there you go. Yes. There you go. But see, if you're in sobriety, you're promised never to get killed by a beer truck. That's one of the promises. Yeah, sort of a inside, yeah, benefit. Yeah. So now you got down to the things. Yes. There's just it's not you're not the one who has the fear. So now you tell the truth about whatever that anxious little hiccup, and you take all the meaning that's given to it by the you're, you know, and then you'll give it its 5 minutes on the stage, and then it moves on. Yeah, this is traveling lighter. The traveling lighter isn't based on how you do things and doing the right things. It's the absence of being the doer brings a lightness to whatever is going on. Yeah. And I'm telling you, the absence of being the doer is a fact. It's not like a hopeful culmination of a lot of effort. It's a fact. There's never been a personal doer. There's been a lot of doing, but there's never been a doer. There's an old statement attributed to Buddha. I don't know. I don't have any verification, but he says events happen, deeds are done, yet there's no individual doer thereof. Exactly. You see? Yeah. So that's the whole point of this platform, is to start and finish there at there is no individual doer thereof. Not trying to convince that which thinks it's the doer, but to speak to that which is not the doer, but is all and everything of all and everything. Yes? So we're trying to not talk to you. Basically, you're the impediment we're trying to get through to get the message to what you are, really. Yeah, so we have to go through these shenanigans of Zooms and shit like that. But basically, we're trying to bypass you and get to what you are. Yeah, so there's fear about
More about the
stuff. Now, yeah,
speak more about the that whole thing, because I still kind of believe I am the doer, even though I've heard this teaching 1,000 times that I'm not the doer.
there's a belief that you are the doer. Yeah, so this doesn't put the emphasis on what you believe. It puts the emphasis on, is there a believer? So there's a belief that you are the doer, but you do not have that belief. That belief manufactures you. The claiming of that belief makes up the you, and then you speak as if you have the belief. Yeah, this is the bondage of self. It's like when you're thinking you're getting the handcuffs taken off, they're really being put on, so to speak. Yes? Yes. See, it's very, very nonchalantly we speak like this. We go, I believe that I'm the doer. No, you don't. You don't believe or not believe. What you are is what you are. It's not a believing, not believing thing. Yeah? So let's be clear. So when we say I, it's not about not saying I, it's saying I with the understanding you're not that. Yeah? And so basically, the experience of believing that you're the doer is having a you. You're not having that belief. Yeah? That belief is being used to imply a you.
Hey,
See?
Paul, I see there's a couple hands up. I saw Mike's hands up.
Hmm?
Mike's hands up. Mike
Oh,
has his hand up.
I thought you guys were finished before, but you can finish. It's
No,
okay.
no, no. But this is important, you see, because when the thoughts I'm believing in this arise, we take the role of being the I. Yes, it's like a glove that we're in the habit of putting our hand in. Yeah, and then we have tons of questions about everything else but that. Yeah. So we're attempting to sort of, and it's asked backwards. The idea of you comes after the recognition of belief in whatever. And yet, how we speak is that it's before and is the one that has the belief. Yeah? If you could see that, that's a revolutionary way of seeing, because we're looking backwards almost all day, thinking we're looking forward. Yeah? It's really that off. So, yeah. And then let's say it was you that has that belief. Then you shouldn't have that belief. And you have to replace that belief with another belief, you see? And there's just another amping up of you, on and on and on and on and on. Then it runs off, and then it does it with another activity, another statement, yeah? And it just builds layers of like a shit sandwich almost, yeah? Just layers and layers and layers. And then you get lost, yeah? You get lost in it, yeah? And then the next time, the same way of understanding speaks, which is, I'm the doer of something I don't even feel like I had anything to do with, really. But let me state, yes, I'm having this belief about whatever. No, you're not. Tell me how you prepare to have a belief. If you're it's like, you can tell me how you prepare to have a sandwich. Tell me how you prepare to have a belief. I like to see it. Break it down, all right? All right, picture there's no you having the belief, so there's that empty whatever, and then suddenly there's a starting of a process that you have a belief. Now, if you do, let's inform us. Tell us how it happens.
Well, when I was little, I believed everything my mommy said. So,
Yes.
and then boom, it got in there.
Yes. But still, that's not it. Yeah. Because again, it's not about if that belief is worthy or not. It's the identification as the one who has the belief. The belief is secondary to this point of this meeting. Yeah. It's the one who thinks has the belief. Yeah. I don't care what the belief is. The same formulation applies. Yeah. If it's a bad belief, you think you had it. If it's a good belief, you think you want to have it. If it's da-da-da. You see, we want to stay at that point. Yeah. And find out in your own experience if it's true or not. I mean, you finding out, not you, but finding out where you are, if it's true, is worth a lot of fucking seminars and books and shit. Way, way, way more valuable. They are. I'm not saying anything against books and everything, but seeing it is incredibly valuable. You can be convinced in that seeing. Yeah. You can be convinced. In other words, you'll believe with certainty. Yeah, that there's no one that's having all the beliefs that are conjured up in the next fucking 10 years. Yeah. So the beliefs come and go, and there's no one who had them and no one who lost them. Yes. That's the beauty. Yeah. That's what we're speaking about. That's what non-duality is negating. Non-duality is not a negation of beliefs. It isn't. It's not a negation of what's happening. There are thoughts, there's feelings, there's things being noticed, there's actions, there's events. All of those things are going on. What it negates is the idea that there's a someone that it's happening to or is doing all of it. Yeah, that's the only, just like in recovery, there's a drive to be restored to sanity, but it's only basically specifically targeting the insanity that precedes the first drink. It's not talking about you're insane with how you dress and shit like that. It doesn't give a shit. It's got a very specific target, yeah, which is the insanity that precedes the first drink for the addict and the alcoholic, yeah? We'll be restored to sanity concerning that. That's a specific thing. In a way, The negation of non-duality is negating not this, not that, not the neti path. It's negating the sense of the nounness, the sense of the doer, the feeler, the thinker. And in fact, once there's a negation of that, there was no need for a negation because there's never been a doer. There's only been doing. There's never been a seer. There's only been seeing. Yes? Yeah. So that's basically the platform. And so sometimes, so we're fishing in a very small little fishing hole. We're not casting to get out of things or beliefs or anything like that. We just want to, because everything else is based on you. Yeah, really. The reason why beliefs seem important is because you have them. Really, So that's what, and it's just so assured when the narration yaps about it. It's just, it's sort of like what the Course said in that paragraph, surely not you. Well, the narration is surely it is you, really. There's just a huge assumption, hey, there's nothing to see, just go on to the changing behaviors. Now, there's nothing to see here. The system immediately puts your attention somewhere else. Yeah? And we take it, and a lot of times when there's a talk, the talk gets taken, and then you go into a whole different topic. Yeah? Which is totally appropriate if it was on a different banner. But it's not applicable to a Zoom talk on non-duality. It's gone. It's the horse got out of the barn, so to speak. Yes, it turns into something else. That's why it's beautiful not to be too successful and not to be organized, because we can be true to our own sense of what happened. Yeah, yeah. Necessarily, it's cleared this up. Now, for me, as a trajectory in time, a lot of things happened, but none of that was necessary. This was necessary. A clarity about the activity of what I'm not and the act of being identified as that. Yes? That's the target, really. And so we attempt to stay there. And then we usually have talks after the talk where people can talk about a lot of things, yeah? But to see, so fears come, but what turns the fear into a story is you, the idea of you. The story that can't live without a story, yes? And so the system furthers itself, and we want to throw a little bit of a fucking wrench in there and just have it stop for a second and maybe see it from not it, yeah? Because you never start or stop. You are always, 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 that which you are is always available at all times. Yeah? Everything else comes and goes. It doesn't, yes? So, yeah. So, Mike, yes. Sorry I went on a rant, but I enjoy it. This is my third talk so far today. Yeah.
That's great.
So I'm going to start pulling out the Zen bat and start whacking everybody. Yes. Yeah. All right.
Before you
Rosemary.
answer Mike's question, I just want to let you know that the people couldn't make it for the next program, so feel free to go over if you need to.
Well, that would be up to you guys. If I had my wishes, it would be over already, but we'll go. We'll see where it takes us. All right, Michael.
I rose my hand when you said that there's a belief in sobriety that you won't get hit by a beer truck. I never heard that one.
Yeah, I made it.
Oh, you did make it up. Good. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
But it
It's
fits
on
with what.
the social page. Not everyone gets. Yeah.
But it fits with.
And what will never happen. You'll never get run over by a beer truck. Yeah. Not,
But it fits with one of my favorite things that you've brought up about being firm in faith in what we're not. I remember the first time I heard you say that, and like by the time I met you, I was okay with putting things aside but that little bit about trying to figure out, how am I how am I doing that? Um, but it fits really good with, like, mythological things like the biting of the apple in the Garden of Evil, right? That there's a thought, don't bite the apple, that, and then you bite it, and then there's a whole download of the whole separation, the whole everything that's ever happened since the biting of the apple. Um, but
Well, that was the duality.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that's
Yes.
but but I needed to associate it with the other fable about Sleeping Beauty, or the ones where she's fallen asleep because she's bitten the apple, but what wakes you up is the kiss, right? Seemingly from another. So, so like you represent to me, right, that kiss, like that there's this, you're seemingly the one. I mean, you may like, I know you don't like kissing me, but all right. But in the dreaming, you slap, right? Or slap, kiss, kiss, slap. Same thing. And very much appreciated. Um, but that is uh, I just wanted to get to the belief part. How in the dreaming there's the counter belief, so the neti, right? Or the kiss instead of the apple, or something like that. Because like when Sino is saying, we believe we're a self. That's like we're riding a trough of a wave, and at the crest it says you, me, them, world, history, and you're just looking at the troughs, and that all fits together, and the words can't get to, like, where the wave dips down, and you're not thinking at that level where everything fits together and it's self-reinforcing, right? But
Yes.
um, I just wanted to bring up that appreciation of the times that you've brought up, the way we identify with what we're not is, or the way we forget what we are is by identifying with what we're not, and
Yes.
and how there's just, I don't know, and then even words can be kind of cool to be used, or questions or comments, because let's say there's, the belief that Mike is bad has long been in place, where, like, I shouldn't say anything. I shouldn't, you know,
Yeah.
that, and you can't get around that, right? Because as soon as you start to talk, you feel bad, and it proves you're bad. So I just wanted to thank.
It,
I wanted to express gratitude for the kisses that you've given over time.
uh, good. It's a self-fulfilling wish. Yeah. It's
Yes,
just
yes.
how it
No
generates.
way out of it. Yeah,
It's like a slinky. It moves, then moves and moves, and so it generates its own movement by the dualistic. Dualism is like a motion that generates this story. Yes, yes. It's either this or that. For it to be this or that, there has to be time involved. Yeah.
yeah.
So
It's quite.
at one time it's this, another time it's that. Then there's this. Yes. So like tick tock.
Yeah,
It's not tick tick tick. It's tick tock tick tock tick tock. Yes.
and it's
These are
quite this.
all little clues of duality you can see. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah. So
idea
it's
of
like,
dualism. It's the way we see it. Yeah.
yeah. So it's quite the
Yeah.
cincher of the tail within the tail, and so that's another thing I could say is,
Yeah.
like, I like so much being in stitches instead when that presents itself. Funny stitches, laughter.
You know, the thing where Zen bitch slap doesn't go to mouth resuscitation, though. We're just slapping. Slap. Just here or there. No further. If you need mouth to mouth, you're going to die. That's good. Yeah. Get it over with, really. You'll, it'll be like it never happened. All right. Anyone else? We can go on today. I don't care. I've
Linda,
got.
no, I think Rhoda had her hand up earlier.
I
She's still
did.
here.
I did.
Rhoda, how are you, Rhoda?
How are you, Paul? So what I hear is, when I stop seeing myself as the doer, the claimer, the believer, the whatever else I think I am, the claiming will stop.
No, the claiming will continue, but it won't bring about the sense of the claimer. Yeah. But the claiming will continue. It's mechanical.
Okay.
It's a program. Yes? And it's running. You have nothing to do with it. So the claiming, whatever you come in contact with, this activity is going to claim it to reinforce its story. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Just get, just get. See, people believe it's volitional. See, this is giving relevance to what you're not. Yeah, as if you're doing the claiming. There's no doer of the claiming. There's just claiming that there's a doer. That's really what's going on. Yeah. So it needs the audience to believe it for it to fulfill the storyline. Yeah. We're sort of the audience in this example. So when you don't fall for the presentation, then there's the claiming, but there's no claimer thereof. Yes. Which is nice. Because then you're open to go other ways. Yeah. Yeah. Sort of when you get engaged as a story, the page one produces a momentum for a page two. Yes, all driven by the you that's linked to the story. If the you takes out, the stories definitely stay short stories. Yes, and most of the time you don't even read to the end. You know how it goes, and then you're left to be driven or directed by other forces, so to speak. Yes. Maybe a force will direct you to look a certain way and there'll be a hummingbird, yeah? And you'll start having this as a constant experience. You look just when the bird arrives, yeah? Wow. There was no thought involved in that, yes? And so you start noticing, Jesus, life goes on a different way when it's not accompanied by thought so much, yeah? Yeah, and maybe you get used to it, sort of like, yeah, you'll get used to it or familiar with it. And now uh, your world starts before thought. Yeah. Not after thought, but before thought. Yeah. And it's a big, vastness. Yeah. And because you're not having a directed attention, you can be directed anywhere. You can see things, other ideas come through, revelations, sense of deep relaxation, tons of possibilities show up. Yeah. But if you're directed by thought, the thought system itself plays the role of blinders in a way. So your field of possibility is going to be shrunk pretty much. And usually it'll be interpreted in time. So being okay won't be the condition you're in. It's I will be okay, or I hope I will be okay, and I have remembering that I was once okay. Yes? That's what you'll be fed. You'll be fed maybe a future possibility, but not right now, or a past one, but not right now. Yeah? Yeah. So now you're enslaved by the hope of possibility, when what you hope to be possible is available right now. Yes? Yes. I'm not talking about jobs and shit. I'm talking about a sense of satisfaction and contentment. Yeah? That will be there if you get the job or you don't get the job. It's the sense of satisfaction and contentment is not based on having a job or not. It isn't. Yeah, it could be tomorrow, but not right now. Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it could be tomorrow. A lot of things could be tomorrow. Yeah. So there is claiming, but it doesn't necessarily work. It needs the audience to go along with it. Yes, we're the audience. Let's say the awareness. Yes. So, like I think you were talking about, Nisargadatta was talking about a clear understanding is quite helpful. Yes, wasn't that part of the thing for the retreat? Well, yeah. Here you go. Yes, an understanding about how what you are is truly what you're not. And yeah, and what it tells you you're not is truly what you are. Yeah. So, yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. This understanding hopefully brings into stark contrast a lot of other understandings. And what you may have thought you understood may not be so. So I think the understanding of non-duality brings out of the weeds the misunderstanding we have of a lot of things. Yeah? Yeah. The selfing is not volitional. You're not doing the selfing. You're not. Yeah? Nor are you being done by the selfing. There is no one. There's no target that can be hit, and there's no one doing it. Yeah? That's the message. So, selfing is fucking boring, to tell you the truth, because it's basically the same old all the time. Yes? So, the only reason why it seems to hold interest is it's presented as about you, but if you're not that you it's presented about, you lose interest in it, yeah? Because it isn't really that entertaining. It presents itself as a weatherman forecast, like a CNN news flash, like a drama, but it's comedy really. Yeah. It's incredible how small it is and how big it thinks it is. It's so small it doesn't exist. That's pretty good. Can't get smaller than that. So, yeah. You know, this is it. If you come to a non-duality session with Paul Hedderman, it pretty much hasn't changed in years, yeah? Because it's a last answer for me. I'm not trying to add things onto it or streamline it or synthesize it or, you know, stitch it up with something else. It's just, I love it. It's empty. It stands on its own. And it doesn't, it is what it is, yeah? You can try to make it anything you want. It's not going to comply with your wish. It's just going to be what it is, which is really a direction of inquiring about what you're not, yeah? Because you are that which you're looking for. That's the assumption. Or as Ramana puts it, being ourselves reality. That's the assumption of non-duality, that we are reality, yeah? And so the greatest mystery, as Ramana puts it, is reality wanting to attain reality. Yeah? But that's not how we feel. We think it's Paul wanting to attain reality. That's what gives that story legs. Yeah? We're in the act of being identified as a manufactured emblem, so to speak, of a lot of weird activities called Paul. Now, Paul, it makes complete sense to Paul to seek reality because Paul needs help here, and it doesn't like the reality as it's appearing. So let me attain reality with the hopes that it would be a great advantage for Paul. Non-duality is not buying that. It's saying, you're not that Paul there, yeah? And basically what Paul is doing is using what it is, reality, to trying to attain reality. Period. End of story. You can try to talk it or twist it or braid it or, you know, fold it in a different way, but that's basically it. Yeah, it's basically not moving. It's saying being ourselves reality. Yeah, that's the assumption. Yeah, hopefully that's what you find out by seeing what you're not, that you are reality. Whatever that means, yeah. But all you really need is to have a realization of what you're not, basically, because you already are what you're looking for. already. You don't have to become anything to be it. It is. So, yeah. Seems to work here, you know. You know. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, so I have a lot of faith in it. And luckily I had the ability to be convinced, yeah. I was, at a certain point, hearing the message of non-duality, there was a convincing that it was the end of the story, no more questions, nothing. And basically, all right. Yeah. What's next, you know? You know, I found it was like coming to terms with the futility of wanting to be there to get it, with the futility of trying to experience your own absence as a false presence, you know? All the futility of all that, of thinking I can know myself into being and I can understand myself into vision. All of that became totally futile, and that was a great note. Yeah. The whole orchestra changed then. Yeah. The whole symphony, the whole how I read the music, everything changed. Yeah. All that flailing away stopped. Yes. Everyone, all the instruments just playing what they were playing. They didn't need any fucking direction. Yeah, and the overall sound was silence. It was beautiful. Yeah, there would be no sound without silence, right? You wouldn't hear a note if it wasn't appearing in silence. Yeah, yeah. So you recognize thought because you're of no thought. Yeah, so you're empty, and then you see something that shows up. Yeah. If you saw a lot of things, there wouldn't be any room for thoughts. There's enough. There can only be 100 people in this room. It would be, but because we're empty, tons of shit can appear. Yeah. You would think if all these thoughts were yours, you'd have to rent storage units out for all the fucking thoughts. You've had thousands of them, seemingly. Where are they getting stored? Jesus Christ. Apple would be constantly sending you messages. You need to buy more terabytes. There's not enough room to store all your thoughts. I know you don't want to lose them. They're yours. Yeah. They're my thoughts. I don't want to lose them. Some people's lives are determined by a thought they thought they had 20 years ago. That's insanity. It led them to kill somebody for no apparent reason, and now they're living out that dreamscape for 20 years in prison, which may be great for them. Maybe they wake up or something great happens in prison. Yeah, that's the beauty of this place. You're never down and out. Yeah, there's value in everything that happens. You don't have to seek it. You just wait for it to show itself. You don't have to give me an affirmation when you're fucked. I'm really not fucked. That's more being fucked. Yeah, what happens over time, you recognize something. Yeah, there's an acceptance of it, and then it turns into something completely different than what you wanted to make it, or what your head wanted to make it. It does. Because you want to see, the head wants to give it form and make it like, this is the resentment that happened and I've been living off it for 40 years. This is what the head likes to do. It likes to cement things, yeah? When everything is fluid, yes? There's no need for storage unit. Thoughts come and go. Yeah? You don't have to catch a feeling. There's going to be another one coming, and another one, and another one. Yeah, I really like that feeling. Yeah, that's a dilemma because you're not ready to receive the next feeling because there's going to be another one. You're not going to feel fucking great all the time. Yeah, you'll feel a dualistic streaming of stuff, and there you go. Some will be contractive, some will be expansive. Yeah. You're wanting the contractive to be expansive, lends to contraction. You wanting the expansion to last longer, that contracts. Yeah. You're giving it all the meaning it has. You, as what we are. Yes. Yeah. As soon as you see something, it changes in a way. Just like when they did the experiments with light. A big research study got paid to see light as a particle. How did light appear to them? As a particle. The next study group got paid to see light as a wave. How did light appear to them? As a wave. What is it? Is it a particle or a wave? It's really neither. It can take the appearance of a particle or a wave based on the observing of it. Yes? Yes. We're in the observing portion of the experiment, not the observed. We're the observing. We're giving everything all the meaning it has. We're not being given a meaning by everything. We're giving everything all the meaning it has. Yeah? We're the dreaming of the dreaming. We're not an object in the dreaming. We're the dreaming. Yeah? There was no choice. There isn't volition. Dreaming. No beginning, no end, dreaming. Yeah? Everything happens, yet nothing ever happened. Dreaming. Yeah? There we are. The Course in Miracles, if you like it, then you know, here's a piece of it. You and I are the dreaming of the dream. Yeah? We forget that we're dreaming, and we give everything we're dreaming the power to affect us. As what? As the dreamt. We become identified as the dreamt, and now everything we're dreaming has the ability to affect us as the dreamt. Yes? So now a thought appears, there's a sense of owning the thought, now the thought can have you, which it does. Yeah? Feelings, my feelings, the feeling can have you, which it does. You own it, you get owned. That's duality. You want to know what non-duality is? Know what duality is. You don't know what non-duality is. You know what duality is. Yeah? Duality is that. You own something, it owns you. Yeah? You want to have a thought? Great. It's going to have you. Yeah? It's going to ruin your day. Yeah? Yeah. You want to claim the feelings? State yourself as the feeler all the time? Well, feelings are going to be able to ruin your vacation in Hawaii. Yeah? They are. You're gonna be stuck on a feeling. I think there's a song. But it's because of the feeler. Yes. You want to move on, but the feeler is a noun. It doesn't flow with the verbing. It doesn't. It gets hit by the verbing. Yes? When it gets hit, it doesn't give. It doesn't flow with the shit. It resists it. Yeah? So now, that which it owns it. Yes. This is the bondage of self. The bondage of self is not a historical date. It's an activity going on. Yeah? You're either clear about it or you're right in the middle of it. Yeah? Basically. Yeah? It's going to say you're always right in the middle of it, even when you're clear. You don't base the clarity about it from it. Yeah? You don't wait for it to say, "Oh, Paul, you've transcended us." No, it doesn't say shit like that. Yeah? It doesn't. You see what you're not. Yeah? Not from that, but from what you are. That's the clincher. Yeah? And then you realize it's pointless to try to convince all that shit because it doesn't care. It's convinced of something already, that it's a long-lasting, independent, separate entity. It's convinced, firm in faith, that it's something else. You want to waste any more time trying to convince it to go the other way? Be my guest, because all that failing is going to be valuable to you. Yeah? Because it will fail. There are no saviors that are going to save you. Saviors fail you, and that's their value. So you find it in your own condition, not being brought to by another condition. Yes? Saviors are there to fail you. So you're left with your own devices, and then you realize they're not your devices. Yes? You don't need to be saved. You are. Yeah? See, maybe you need to be saved from the self, but most of us want to be saved as the self. Yeah? Yeah. Well, any question? Anyone else? I'm just ranting, that's all. I have nothing. I didn't get a book and I'm on page 23. I just saw stuff. There was a seeing of stuff, and some of it made indelible impressions that keep expressing to this day. Yeah? What hit me is still expressing through me. 20-something years later. It's mind-boggling. Yeah? I can't believe how ecstatic it is about sharing, because I'm not at all, in most cases. Yeah? It just keeps fucking looking for any opportunity to share. Yeah. Literally. Yeah. Tuesday at 8:30 to 8:45, sign me up. Yeah. Can we squeeze one in Wednesday afternoon, 3 to 3:15? Squeeze me in. Yeah. I'll do 12 Zooms a week. I won't even know if anyone's sending me money because I don't look at it. So I don't care. I get taken care of. I'll fucking talk. As long as there's interest, I'll talk pretty far. Yeah. I've got my bladder conditioned. I can hold out for an hour and a half now. It was conditioned for an hour of AA, but now I've got Zoom, so it's an hour and a half. It's conditioned. Yeah, I can put up with it. Yeah. I love the message, man, because I'll tell you, thank God as a vague memory, because I could never do it justice, the mental suffering that was playing in this event. Yeah. The exquisite suffering of that faith in that failed instrument can produce. Yeah. The instrument can't produce it. It's faith in it. Faith in the thoughts. Yes? That produce these mental hells. Yes. Yeah. We're totally a product of faith. We don't have faith. Faith is, I feel, almost like one of the four forces: gravity, something else, yeah? I see faith as one of those, to tell you the truth. The greatest force, really, of all, yeah? And you can know the tree by its fruits. You can see where the faith lies. If you're living in a lot of anxiety about what's not happening, that's a product of faith in the thought system. There's a perfect diagnosis. There must be a huge faith in the thought system to produce anxiety out of what's not happening. That's a miracle, really. Seriously, We're miracle workers all day. We're making shit out of nothing quite a lot. That's difficult to fucking do. Dogs aren't doing it. Cats aren't doing it. My cat's not making shit out of nothing. It isn't. I'm pretty sure. Doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like it's worrying about next week. It's out cold. And if you ever look at cats, they know how to sleep, man. They fucking look very comfortable when they're sleeping. I don't think next Wednesday is disturbing them, or last week. I just don't. Yeah. And they look forward to sleeping. Every drop of a hat, they're out cold. Yeah. So faith is, I feel, faith is a force in manifestation. The greatest force, greater than gravity, greater than anything. Faith. Yeah? How can you quantify it? It's difficult, but you know it, you feel it when it's moved through you. Yeah, you can tell there's some solidity to something that doesn't. It's not standing on a form or a foundation. It's just some force. Yeah, and I don't think it's you individually accepted. I think it's out there. Yeah, and things are using faith, and the mental state definitely uses faith to reinforce its story, for sure. Yeah, it does. Yeah, so yeah, so when Nisargadatta had that faith, and the guru gave him the one sale he only needed was having faith in the I am, that faith was sufficient enough to convince Nisargadatta, or whatever. Yeah, and then Nisargadatta, speaking out of that conviction, a book called I Am That came about, and he's one of the foundational speakers of non-duality. Yes, never doing it ever. Yeah, heard the message, had faith in it, and that faith became a conviction. Yeah, and he wasn't moved by all the moving parts anymore. He had seen through things, obviously. Yeah, he told people to leave after they'd been there for a few weeks. Make room for someone new. Get the fuck out. Yes. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, stay here for 3 years. No, you got the message. Move on. Yes. Bring in someone else. I'm a believer in that in a way. I like that. Yeah. So
It was 8 or 10 days that he allowed them to stay. Otherwise, asked to leave.
10 days. Yeah. Now, I would outdo Nisargadatta. It'd be like a couple of hours, really. If you came over my house, you'd be packing to leave in a few hours. Somebody is telling me, I want to have a private session with you for an hour, and I haven't sent anything back. I'm going to say, well, it ain't going to be an hour, that's for sure. The pass on this invitation doesn't take an hour usually. We're having fun here, but yes, one-on-one, it's basically, hey, you know, hey, the best of Paul is on YouTube. Go to YouTube. Listen, save your $50 and listen to it on your own pleasure, and then get back to me. They very rarely get back to me. That's great. Yes. So yeah, 8 to 10 days. So anyone else? We're over time, I guess. What time is it anyway? What the hell? I've lost it all. It's 5:51.
8:51 here on the East Coast.
So let's stop at 6 o'clock or 9. Yeah, how's that? All right. Well, we can just look gazingly into the squares. I can't see anyone's eyes anyway.
I have a question for you. Just a curiosity is about believing versus faith. Do you think there's any difference between that?
Yes. The faith is before the belief. When you believe, there's a faith in that. When you don't believe, there's a faith in that. Yes? Yes? When you don't believe, there's faith before that to cause you not to believe. You're having faith in that which is saying it doesn't believe. And then the other case, you're having faith in something that says it's believing. I would question that one who says it's believing and not believing. Yes. Yeah, seriously. I wouldn't put attention on the belief. I would go to that, the belief that there's a someone that's having belief. Yeah. I think that's the most efficient way. Yeah. Because there's faith, just like it said, there's a denial of what you are and firm in faith in what you're not. That's the point, yes? That's what the Course in Miracles says. It's very clear. They go hand in hand. Firm in faith in what you're not is a denial of what you are. It says denying what you are. How do you deny what you are? Being firm in faith in what you're not. That's a denial of what you are. Now, no one, if you caught him in a moment, would say, I'm in the act of denying what I am. There's no, I'd say I'm in the act of, getting ready to steal money out of your drawer or something. But I'm not in, no one says I'm in the act of denying what I am usually, except when you get arrested by the cops. Then I was always trying to be in the act of denying who I was. but you know, so if you like the Course, read that part. He makes it very clear. You can't have one without the other. If you're firm in faith in what you're not, that's the act of being denying what you are. Yeah? Yeah. It isn't like one and then there could be something. No, it's one begets the other. Yeah? It's duality. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Being firm in faith in what you're not, you're in the active denial of what you are. I had no idea that was going on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah? The Course is an incredible diagnostic tool, quite a lot. It's describing, and it goes into great detail, what's actually going on while we think shit's going on. Yeah? It goes into the underpinnings of what really is going on. Yeah? While we think something's really going on. Yeah? And then maybe it triggers a sense of aha-ness in you. Well, then read on. And if there'll be more of those. Yeah? And yeah, I think that the way it describes the dreaming is one of the clearest. I haven't read tons of shit, but to me it's one of the clearest takes on the dreaming. If that means anything to you, to me it does. Yeah, so check it out. It can become a lot of words. It's thick, but some of the downloads are pretty clear. Yeah, in the Course. So, yeah. So how can you make it any other thing that there's something else we make to be ourselves? What is that but the act of being identified with a mental idea? Yes? Yeah? You can't make it to be yourself, but through the act of being identified as it, it produces the same effect. Yeah? You cannot make what you're not to be yourself. It's impossible, because what you are is what you are. Yeah? That doesn't go anywhere. So there has to be an act of being identified as it that makes that illusion or that seemingly activity appear. Yeah? It appears seemingly. You take it to be true, but it's an appearance. Yeah? Nothing ever changed anything. But there's an act of being identified as what you're not, which is really what allows the denial of what you are through the act of being identified as what you're not. Yeah, there you go. So what do you want to do? Spend a lot of time trying to stop denying what you are? No. Just see you're not that which is in the act of being identified as what you're not. You're not that. It implies you are. It assures you are. It insinuates you are. It supposes you are, but you're not. Yeah? Yeah. So it sort of like always leaves a dangling before the period of the sentence, and then we fill it up. We end the sentence with belief and faith. Yeah. The faith in that being something else ends the sentence of your own slavery in a way. Yeah? Yes? Your own prison sentence is fulfilled by that act of being identified as what you're not. Yeah. So the more obsession with that, in a way, the more what you are is seemingly not so. Yeah? To the point you may even start looking for it, as if it's outside of you, which makes you the center of the universe, and now you're going to look for God somewhere in the universe, as the God the mental God. Yeah. Good luck. You'll find it. You'll find you a lot. You'll find the mental God. He'll be playing with your ass all day. You'll be a knower of God, Yeah. But as Ramana said, to know God is to be God. Yeah. It's a yes, he does. He says that very clearly. To know God is to be God. Yeah. So we're way past the point of knowing God. We're at the point of being God. What? Oh yeah. There I said it. I wouldn't have said it if we ended up at 5:30, but now the last 30 minutes, the extra 30 minutes gave me a time to hang myself. Yes. To know God is to be God. Don't get mad at me, Ramana Maharshi. Hey. In non-duality, he's untouchable. He's an untouchable. You don't fuck with Ramana. Yeah. Yeah, all right. So there you go. So let me say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for putting up with me. I appreciate it. And I will be back on Tuesday as long as I'm alive and not arrested and healthy enough. Yes? And the Wi-Fi has been paid for and everything else. All of those extenuating circumstances. I'll be here.